Before you click away, Wingspan is not a gateway game and should not be used to introduce new gamers to this hobby. It's still a really great game, and that obviously doesn't apply to everybody. Sure, maybe you can use it to introduce new people to this hobby. That's fantastic. But if you are new to the board gaming hobby and you don't have a wall of games behind you or know somebody who does, and you've heard about Wingspan, I wanted to make this review for you. And if you love Wingspan, well, I wanted to make this review about all of its expansions. Look, the Europe box as well, it's floating, soaring like the owl that it is. I want to cover what all the expansions add to the game, which ones should you get if you enjoy Wingspan, are any of them necessary, how do they build upon the experience, all that and more coming to you right now in this video. But first off, let me explain how the game works. And this game is great. For those of you who just wanted to know if the game was good, the game is good. The game is very good, and you should go out and get a copy. So many people will enjoy it, and so many people who don't enjoy heavier style games or heavy games will enjoy this game. It's so accessible to people, but I still believe it is not a gateway game. It's just, I think, a little too complicated for people who aren't used to normally playing games. And if you don't take my word for it, well then take Mandy Patinkin's word for it.
Tuck one of the cards you drew on your last turn behind... This is just nonsense. This is incomprehensible. This is an IQ test for fucking idiots.
I rest my case. This is a game that I have introduced to a few people, but my bar for these sorts of things is generally my parents who enjoy Ticket to Ride and Puerto Rico and have played a variety of games, but there's something with the mechanics of this game that is hard for players who don't play a lot of games consistently to immediately latch onto. And I think that can provide a sense of frustration. We don't want that. We don't want that when we're trying to introduce somebody new into this hobby. We need to be aware that this can happen. And I think referring to this exclusively as a gateway game and a great game to bring new players in does both it and those players a disservice and sets up the incorrect expectation, which can lead to frustration instead of exuberance in a game night. And that's what we want, or at least that's what I want. I want exuberance at my game nights and not frustration, and then frustration on your part having to re-explain the rules over and over and over again. So with that out of the way, let's break down how this game plays. If you're new to Wingspan, this is what you really need to know. Here's the basics. You're going to be adding birds into 3 different habitats. Grass, desert, it's not the desert, it's just yellow, water, wetlands, forests, deserts, and tsunamis, I think are the official names. All of these birds will be worth points at the end of the game. Look at that. All of these birds also require food to entice them to go into your little row. You get the food, you pay the food, you add the bird to your row, bing, bang, boom. But the weird part about this game that I find a lot of people struggle with is how you activate your actions, because these birds also serve as adding additional actions and abilities to the things you get to do on your turn. This is what's referred to as an engine builder. You start out small, and as you progress through the game, you're going to get more and more powerful. You've built up an engine, and now a thing that used to only give you 1 piece of food now gives you 3 pieces of food and an additional food, and lets you lay an egg, and lets you draw a card. And so your actions get better and better as the game progresses, which allows you to do more and more exciting things. You can do 4 things on your turn. It's very simple. You can play a card. You pay its food. You place it in a habitat where it likes to exist. You can gain food. You get to gain a certain number of dice from the food bird feeder and get those little tokens that are associated with those dice. You can lay eggs on your bird. Eggs are worth points at the end of the game, and they also allow you to expand as you continue throughout the game. To play more and more birds, you obviously need to have eggs, because as we all know, bird currency is eggs. That's what it is. Birds are only enticed to come over if you throw eggs at them. Or you feed them eggs? We're not clear on that point. You need eggs, that's the point. That's one of the actions. And then action number 4 is you get to draw cards, because if you don't have any birds in your hand, well, a bird in the hand is worth 2 in the bush, or a billion in the bush, because you can't play them from the bush. You need them in your hand, and that's why you have to draw the cards into your hand. Now, the efficacy of these actions is determined by whatever spot is open on your player board. This is the base game board right here. If you have no birds here, then the first spot that is open is 1 dice worth of food. You can take that dice. If this is covered and this is covered, then you can now start taking 2 dice worth of food. And if this is covered, now you can start taking 3 dice worth of food. Very similar for eggs and very similar for cards as you progress. There's also little symbols here that allow you to discard things that you may have, cards, food, and eggs, to get additional resources of a different type if you're in sort of the second level. This is the base Wingspan board. We will be looking at a different board as we talk about the expansions. One of the expansions adds in a different board. However, in addition to activating these abilities printed on your player board, you also get to activate the brown abilities. There's just a little strip here to remind you that you can activate them. You get to activate the brown abilities of the birds as you go back to the bird nest. And this is where I think it gets confusing, literally because you're going from right to left and not left to right. I'm pretty sure that's it. That's where the confusion happens. And when you can wrap your mind around that, then the game becomes a little bit easier to understand. So if I activate my 2 dice here, then I'll be a bird here and a bird here, and I'll get to do those abilities if they have abilities to activate. Because some of them don't. Some of them are just worth a lot more points, but they don't have abilities. So it's a give and take of which birds do you activate, which birds do you even build, which birds do you even keep into your hand. You go through this whole rigmarole for 4 rounds. The person who has the most points at the end of all those rounds wins. Wingspan is a great game. It's one of my girlfriend's favorite games. It's a game that blew up and people are still talking about, and rightfully so, because mechanically it is so interesting, and the variants of birds that come out give you a different puzzle and a different way to deal with the board every time and try to get the most points every time. On its own, Wingspan is a really great game. You do not need any of the expansions to make it exciting. However, they have currently 3 expansions, and there are plans for more expansions because you know what? There are more birds in the world. There are more birds to cover out there, and there are more bird cards to get to add to that variance. And that was what their first expansion was, the European expansion. It just added in a whole bunch of new bird cards. If you love Wingspan and you think, hey, you know what this game could use? More bird cards, European expansion has you covered. It also adds in a special new type of bird that will give you points or additional bonuses at the end of the round or at the end of the game. These are not brown powers. These won't be activated when you activate that ability. They're triggered in other ways, basically. That's what the European expansion does. The next expansion that came out was the Ocenia expansion, which I think I finally pronounced right for the first time in my life. This brought in a couple new things, namely more birds, of course, but namely they brought in nectar. Now, nectar is a wild resource in this game. You have a new set of dice where you can take nectar. And so you're thinking, well, why wouldn't I take nectar all the time forever? Well, your nectar expires at the end of each round. So you can only use it on that round, and so you can't stockpile it for later. So that's kind of the give and take of nectar. But if you use nectar, you then add it to a spot on your board, and the person who used the most nectar in all of the 3 different habitats, I can't tell you how long I had to cut that pause out for. It was a long time for me to figure out what the word habitat was. Whoever spends the most nectar in their habitats gets an extra 5 points. So you can get extra points that way, and nectar gives you that flexibility of when you really need to purchase the birds. But the best part, and you can see that I'm opening up my base game because I've incorporated these boards into the box of the base game. The best part about nectar is that it comes with its own new board. And the board is there so that you can have a spot for you to put that nectar, right? You can see here, it says nectar, 5 and 2 points. I hope it focused. But the biggest part here, and why I think Ocenia is the best expansion, is because of the second tier abilities. I'll show you a picture of the original board, and now you can see a picture of the Oceania board. You'll see in that second section, especially up at the top, you get to take 2 dice worth of food. And this is huge for accelerating how quickly you can get stuff on the board. You'll also see that the amount of eggs also goes down a little bit, making you really have to max out on eggs to be getting those points. One of the main strategic complaints with Wingspan, the base game, is that your last round, it doesn't really make sense to keep buying birds because of the efficiencies of actions that you'd have to take. It really just makes sense to take eggs for just your last round. You say, yeah, I'm just going to take 4 eggs every time and get 20 points, rather than try to get another bird and have to spend eggs to do that and then end up with 10 to 12 points for those actions. Just doesn't make sense. But with the Oceania board, I find it opens up so many different possibilities just because of how the board is structured. I feel like the board balance is a lot better. And if you like Wingspan, for me, the Oceania expansion is very close to a must-have. Or at least you should target it as your first expansion if you don't have any of the expansions. Target this one as the first expansion to get, because I find the board balance to be really exciting and makes that end game feel different and distinct, or more different and distinct than it has in the past. So that's what the Oceania expansion brings to the table. And then finally, we have the Asia expansion. Asia expansion, I just got this for my birthday this past month. And this is a standalone game, a standalone 1 to 2 player game for Wingspan, or you can just combine it with any of the additional content. It also gives you a way to play 6 to 7 players, which is stupid, and we'll cover that in a second.
Editing Chris here, we didn't cover it in a second because it's dumb, and you should never play Wingspan at 6 to 7 players. And if you're thinking, yeah, I really want to get this to play at 6 to 7 players, here's what you should do. You should have just 2 copies of Wingspan and just play a 3-player game and a 4-player game, because that's essentially all it is. You're kind of in competition for the same end of round goals, but you're actually taking your turns in order 1, 2, 3 and like 1, 2, 3, 4, and then you can use the abilities of other people. But you're basically just playing 2 games of Wingspan side by side and then comparing points. Does not feel like you're actually playing a real full 6 to 7 player game of Wingspan, because that also would be excruciating to have to sit through and wait for everybody's turn. Just play 2 different games of Wingspan, or just play 2 different games. It's okay in a game night, if you have 6 to 7 players, to break off into 2 groups and both have a great time, rather than forcing all of you to play something at a subpar experience just so that everyone can participate. You can participate. You can mix and match. You can time it out. Don't get Asia for that. Get it for the other stuff, which we're about to talk about, but not for that. All right, back to less blurry and more interesting looking Chris.
The good part about Asia, I think this is the second expansion to target. European expansion was fine. It's just more birds, but they're not like supremely exciting, and they don't shift up the game that much. And especially because you get more bird cards anyway in both this and the Oceania, doesn't make sense to get European maybe at all, especially now that these expansions are coming out. I think everybody who has the European expansion got it because it was the first expansion and people wanted to expand their copy. And I think we'll see moving on down the line, unless you're getting the whole shebang, the European expansion is going to be the last expansion that you get. This should be the second expansion that you get if you're interested. The main draw here is that it adds in this new little duet board. This duet board acts as additional bonuses that you can get throughout the game. And all of the goals, every round you have a round-end objective that you're striving towards, all of the goals are based around which spaces on the duet board you're covering. So every time you build a bird, every time you play a bird, you get to take one of these little yin-yang symbols and put them on the duet board. And at the end of the game, you get points for however many, for your largest group of symbols that are touching to each other. So you want to get them clustered together. You want to create a pathway. You're making this little pathway, and that's something to be paying attention to as you choose what types of birds that you are going to play, because only certain spots can be taken. In addition, all of the end round goals focus on the things that you've taken. So you might be fighting for specific bird spaces. And so it doesn't matter if you have that type of nest on your bird, because a lot of the goals, let's say, are, hey, if you have this bird of this nest type, the person who has the most gets a bunch of points, right? Now, when I play that bird, I can play it for its nest type. I can play it for how its beak is pointing. I can play it for the type of food that I use. And some of these spots give you immediate bonuses. And some of these spots are better positionally. And so you have a really fun little back and forth on this board that's quite satisfying. It makes a two-player experience. It enriches that two-player experience. And I like that you could just get Wingspan Asia as a two-player game and not have to get the base game, and yeah, it would be a perfectly fine experience. I don't know which of these two I would get if I didn't have anything Wingspan, if I only played at two players. I'd probably still get the base game. The production quality here is good. The difference in price is not going to be that significant. I think it's like $20 difference. And this gives you the option to play with more people. Plus you get a little bit more content, more cards, etc. But it's worth noting that all the expansions are sort of backwards compatible. So if you just had Asia and Oceania, you could just play with those as well. But yeah, Asia was fun. It didn't blow my mind, the two-player experience here. I got it because I like Wingspan and I kind of just want to get everything, and because my girlfriend also really likes it and will play it with me, and so I like having that additional content and the variability. I also wanted to get it because usually for my birthday I ask for expansions rather than new games, especially now that I've transitioned into this YouTube space, and that's always kind of a good gift to enrich an experience as well. And so it didn't blow me away, but I think if I'm playing a two-player game, and that's quite often how I play this game, I don't see a reason why I wouldn't incorporate this almost every time, because I like what it brought. It's not to say that it blows regular two-player Wingspan out of the water, but I think I just enjoyed that extra additional puzzle, and it didn't detract from my Wingspan experience. Wingspan is a game that I think everybody should have in their collection. I think it has been hyped up for a reason, and I think you also will get the pushback. And I'm kind of one of those people who played it a bunch of times when it first came out and then said, oh, you know what, it's Wingspan. Everybody knows Wingspan. So I don't want to play Wingspan because everybody knows Wingspan. Well, yeah, everybody knows it because it's a legitimately great game. It also has a robust solo mode, which I don't know anything about because I don't really play games solo, but if you wanted to play this solo, you could, and I have it on good authority that it's fun to do. It was a contender in our best solo game of all time tournament that we held on this channel. You can go check that out if you want to see how well it did. It didn't win, but maybe it came in second. Who knows? But I'm definitely one of those people. Like I recognize this is objectively a fantastic game. It gets a seal of distinction from me, and it should. It broke through the hobby. It defined the nature genre and made people realize what was possible with a fun, interesting, unique theme with solid, accessible mechanics behind it. And I keep saying accessible because they are accessible. Once you get it, it's pretty good, but I just find that the learning curve on this isn't that of something that is a true gateway game, like Ticket to Ride, or Settlers of Catan, or name another gateway game out there. I think there is some weird complexity here with the amount of cards and different information and different skills and different additions that you can add on to your engine, which make this fun, which make it a robust experience, that causes some slight terror or frustration or overwhelm to certain people, aka my parents and Mandy Patinkin, and a few other people who I've played it with who aren't that huge on board games, that I think for some people this game is going to be a home run in terms of getting people into the hobby and realizing the potential that exists in the board gaming hobby. And I think for other people, it's not going to be. And not recognizing that that is the case, I think is a detriment and will be a detriment to your excitement and enjoyment of the game. So sound off in the comments about how successful you've been in getting Wingspan to the table with new players, how well they've adapted to it. I think that's valuable information for anybody who's interested in not even just buying this game, but playing it with their friends or trying to introduce it to their friends. I think that is the sort of relevant conversation that I want to have with this review, because at this point, everybody knows Wingspan. Why am I talking about Wingspan? Well, it's also because I need to review a Stonemaier game, so Stonemaier will send me their new games. Okay, fine. But I also feel very passionate that this is a conversation that needs to be brought up and needs to be had so that everybody can get as enthralled in this hobby as possible. Hopefully that rundown of the expansions was helpful for you if you're curious about the expansions. In terms of like rating, Oceania is fantastic. Asia is good, and European expansion is good. Like, it's good, but it's just these actually add to the game, and that just adds more cards and less chance to draw the very powerful ravens. So I think that's it for me. If this is the first time you've heard about Wingspan, let me know how you got here, because I'm very curious. And if you are willing to deal with that little bit of frustration potentially at first, this is a very rewarding game with a relaxing theme that a whole variety of people can enjoy and have enjoyed. Even if us gamer types say, okay, we've enjoyed it too much, we want to play something different, it's still really good, and I hope that you enjoy your time with it as well. Anyway, that's it for me. My name's Chris George. I don't have a catchphrase. I don't have a box for the European expansion, and I'm soon not gonna have a box for these. I only kept this to house the other boards, but I think with some storage solution magic, I can get all of these expansions into this box, and that's it. There's coming out with a nesting box, or they have come out with a nesting box, which will have room for the future expansions as well. And I think, but it's just so obnoxiously big, and it shouldn't be that big on a shelf. Wingspan shouldn't be that big on a shelf for what this game is. It is perfectly great in this one box, and I'm gonna fit it in there. Maybe I'll make an insert about it. Maybe I'll make a video about it. Let me know if you'd be interested in seeing that. I believe it can be done. I've seen some examples, so if you wanna see that, definitely let me know. Thanks again for watching. I'd play you Fly Like an Eagle by Michael Jordan. I think it's by Michael Jordan, right? It's not just because it was that the one in Space Jam? Anyway, it's copyright, so I can't. So just think of it.